What if the most powerful move a future king ever made wasn't a speech, a coronation, or a declaration of war, but simply placing his hand over an unsigned piece of paper? One gesture. No raised voice. No public announcement. Just a calm, deliberate act that stopped a reigning monarch cold and sent shockwaves through one of the world's most powerful families. A decision had already been made. The paperwork was ready. And then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. What you're about to hear isn't rumor. It isn't tabloid gossip. This is the inside story of a royal family at war with itself over loyalty, legacy, and who really controls the crown. A senior royal figure recently blocked another prominent member of the family from permanently transferring one of the monarchy's most symbolically important residences. And the way it happened, so direct, so loaded with constitutional implications, left the entire family scrambling to understand what the fallout actually means. The document was already on the table. The reigning monarch had chosen the residence, approved the transfer, and was essentially ready to sign over permanent control. But before that signature could happen, the heir to the throne walked into the room and stopped the decision cold. Not with a whispered suggestion. Not with a delayed memo. Not with a soft request to reconsider. The future king declared that no residence belonging to the crown would be handed over without a formal vote. And honestly, the fact that he had to say that out loud tells you everything about how far along this plan had already gone. The monarch had expected questions. He probably expected some pushback. But he did not expect his son to walk in and physically place his hand over the unsigned authorization. The gesture was calm, which somehow makes it more powerful. He wasn't asking his father to reconsider. He was stopping him entirely. The king looked down at his son's hand resting on the document, then slowly raised his eyes and said nothing. He had genuinely believed his authority as the reigning monarch would settle the matter. Instead, his heir had drawn a clear, unmovable line. The queen consort knew nothing about what had happened until an aide found her in the corridor. She had already been discussing staffing arrangements, renovation plans, and how the household would be managed. In her mind, this was already happening. Then the message arrived: the transfer had been blocked. She stopped walking, dismissed the aide, walked into the nearest room, and closed the door without saying a single word. Humiliation arrived before anger did. And that detail matters enormously, because it explains everything about how she responded later. The heir carried more than just an objection into that room. He produced a constitutional briefing, a formal document explaining the legal and financial limits surrounding major royal decisions. The briefing made one thing unmistakably clear: permanent control of an official residence couldn't be granted privately while security, maintenance, and ceremonial costs remained tied to crown funding. The transfer would affect future reigns. It would bind the next sovereign's authority in ways that couldn't easily be undone. This wasn't simply about who got to live where. It was about who would be forced to pay for that decision decades from now. Silence became impossible after that revelation. Several family members whose approval the king would eventually need had been kept completely in the dark. Only a very small, select circle had seen the authorization. And the heir feared that secrecy had been essential to the plan, which is such a telling detail. Because if the transfer was straightforward and clearly appropriate, why was it being handled so quietly? That's where the situation becomes genuinely unsettling. But procedure was only the surface of this conflict. The heir believed the late queen had left a specific instruction concerning official royal residences, and he intended to confront the king with her exact words. But before he could reveal what the former monarch had recorded, he first had to face the painful truth about why the king wanted to make this transfer so desperately. Behind the argument over walls, keys, and signatures were three people fighting for three entirely different futures. The king saw the residence as final proof that his wife had been truly accepted, not merely tolerated, not simply accommodated, but genuinely and permanently accepted. His wife saw it as protection against the day her husband could no longer defend her position. The heir saw the same building as something held in trust for the crown, not a private gift, but a symbol belonging to the monarchy beyond any single marriage, personal grievance, or private promise. Three completely different understandings of what the same building represents, and none of them entirely wrong. Which is precisely what makes this so complicated. The king carried the deepest personal wound. For years, he had watched his wife perform royal duties while still sensing an undercurrent of resistance around her. Crowds applauded. Officials bowed. Yet acceptance often felt conditional, as though one shift in power could leave her exposed and vulnerable all over again. Giving her the residence permanently would be more than a generous act. It would be his strongest declaration that she was not a temporary figure beside the sovereign, but a permanent, protected part of the monarchy he had built alongside her. Understanding that emotional context makes his actions completely understandable. The heir understood that emotion too. He wasn't blind to it. But he feared the precedent it would set. He knew that every private arrangement made now could become a serious burden during his own reign. A royal asset wasn't simply a valuable property. It was a home held by the crown for official use across generations. Once personal promises began reshaping those boundaries, every limit would become easier to break. The king saw that resistance as a rejection of his marriage. The heir saw the transfer as proof that personal affection had begun to overpower sound judgment. Neither man believed he was betraying the other. Yet betrayal was exactly what both of them felt. The king believed his son had chosen bureaucratic procedure over family loyalty. The heir believed his father had chosen one private vow over the institution they were both sworn to protect. That isn't a misunderstanding. That is a fundamental collision of values. Meanwhile, the queen consort sat alone, a preliminary floor plan open before her. She studied the marked rooms carefully, then folded the document and returned it to its folder. Her anger was real, but fear ran beneath it. The heir's intervention had exposed a truth she had tried not to face. Her security might last only as long as the king remained strong enough to guarantee it personally. That is a terrifying position to be in. And it explains precisely why the residence mattered so deeply to her, far beyond status or comfort. The princess had understood that danger before the confrontation even began. During a private conversation, the heir admitted that challenging his father could cause lasting, irreparable damage. She didn't tell him what to do. Instead, she warned him that silence would become consent the moment that transfer was signed. Her words stayed with him when he walked into that office. That advice reframes the entire situation. It wasn't about whether the heir wanted conflict. It was about whether inaction would make him complicit in something he firmly believed was wrong. Months earlier, the king had made his wife a deeply personal promise after she confessed her fear of being left without a secure royal home. He assured her that she would always have one. The transfer was his attempt to honor that intimate vow. But the Princess Royal recognized the heir's demand for a vote immediately. She had heard a similar warning years before, during a recorded private conversation with the late queen that the king had never known took place. When she finally opened the sealed account of that conversation, a private family dispute transformed into a battle over the monarchy's final, non-negotiable boundary. The crisis hadn't truly begun with one hand placed over a document. It had begun years earlier during a private evening at Windsor Castle, when the late queen summoned her daughter after a tense family dinner. No courtiers remained in the room. No formal announcement followed. Yet before the Princess Royal left that evening, the monarch had made one instruction unmistakably clear. Official residences, those attached directly to the sovereign's role, were never to become rewards for personal loyalty. Not under any circumstances. Not for anyone. The distinction mattered more than anyone at that dinner fully understood. Privately owned royal properties could be inherited, gifted, or placed into family trusts. An official residence was entirely different. It existed to support the work of the sovereign, and its costs, staff, security, upkeep, and ceremonial purpose extended far beyond a single reign. The late queen feared that once those boundaries were weakened, personal affection could quietly become a permanent institutional obligation that future sovereigns would be powerless to reverse. The Princess Royal listened without interrupting. Her mother spoke without bitterness and without attacking anyone personally. Instead, the monarch asked her daughter to hold on to one core principle. Generosity must never be confused with ownership. This wasn't casual dinner conversation. It was a deliberate warning, preserved and kept ready for exactly the kind of crisis that had now arrived. That very evening at Windsor, the king had spoken openly about establishing a permanent household for his wife in the Queen's official residence. He answered a question about it without hesitation. When the authority became his, he said, he would make certain it happened. The late Queen heard every word. She placed her glass down, looked directly at her son, and ended the conversation before anyone could soften what had just been promised. Later that same night, she recorded her concerns in a private conversation with her daughter. Her worry wasn't personal hostility. Her fear was far larger. If royal property became compensation for emotional wounds, then every private reassurance could eventually demand public funding, permanent staffing, and legal protection from future sovereigns. She acted immediately. She dictated a formal memorandum, a short, official written instruction preserved for future reference, and then added one handwritten sentence of her own. No permanent reassignment of the residence should occur without collective consultation and recorded approval. That sentence is everything. It didn't say the transfer could never happen. It said it couldn't happen quietly, privately, without proper review and accountability. The Princess Royal kept a certified copy. She never used it while her mother lived, because no transfer had yet been attempted. The king had received only a general reminder that the property must remain available for official duties. He was never told that his mother had specifically documented her objection to granting it permanently to any consort without a formal vote. Now, that hidden record could no longer be ignored. The Princess Royal placed the document before the heir and explained its origins through her own documented account of that Windsor conversation. He read the handwritten final line twice, closed the folder, and decided he would not let palace officials carry this confrontation for him. With the late Queen's own words in his possession, the future king walked toward his father's private office, knowing that one sentence could stop the transfer and fracture the family at the same time. There were no advisors between them when the heir entered the king's office. The king stood beside his desk, the authorization still unsigned. His son entered carrying the late Queen's memorandum, closed the door behind him, and placed the page directly beside the transfer order. What followed wasn't a constitutional lecture. It was a confrontation between a father determined to protect his wife and a son refusing to inherit the consequences of that protection. The heir spoke first. He explained that the residence belonged to the crown, not to any single marriage or reign. It was supported through official structures, which meant its staff, security, upkeep, and ceremonial function were all tied to the monarchy itself. That made the transfer far more than a private act. It would bind everyone who came after them. The king didn't retreat. He argued that sovereigns had always held authority over royal households. He insisted that giving his wife permanent use of the property would not remove it from the crown. The positions formed quickly. Several senior officials supported a renewable agreement, allowing the Queen consort to occupy the residence while the king remained sovereign. The heir and the Princess Royal rejected any wording that suggested permanent personal possession. Another family member searched for a middle path, one that would protect the Queen consort's dignity without weakening the fundamental boundary around official crown property. The king listened carefully as loyalty began to separate itself from obedience. Each speaker addressed him respectfully, but respect didn't automatically become support. Then the Princess Royal opened the late Queen's memorandum and began reading aloud. She kept her voice steady and firm through the formal wording. Then she reached the handwritten final line. She paused briefly, swallowed, and continued. Honoring her mother's instruction meant causing real pain to her brother. She felt the weight of every word. The council chamber tightened further when a critical financial detail was uncovered. The original transfer would have placed long-term renovation, staffing, and security costs under crown funding, even if the Queen consort later ceased carrying out official royal duties. What had been presented as a straightforward housing arrangement now looked like a permanent financial obligation being quietly imposed on future reigns. That is the detail that changes absolutely everything. It wasn't just about who held the keys. It was about who would receive the bill, potentially forever. The heir then offered a formal compromise. He fully supported the Queen consort's use of the residence throughout the current reign, with complete dignity, household protection, and official support. But once that reign ended, the property would return automatically to unrestricted crown use. His proposal made something important undeniably clear. He wasn't trying to remove her from royal life. He was preventing a temporary personal promise from being quietly written into permanent institutional law. The council remained divided. The king couldn't simply impose the transfer by force. But the compromise was now on the table, and it could not be ignored. Every voice fell silent as the king reached for the original document. He had entered that chamber determined to fulfill his promise. But the hidden financial clause now forced him to choose between protecting his wife and protecting the authority he intended to leave to his son. The decision reached the Queen consort before any official statement was prepared. She would be permitted full use of the residence as long as the king remained sovereign. But it would not become her permanent royal property. No future entitlement would be guaranteed. No personal transfer would survive beyond the reign. On paper, the distinction appeared technical. But when she heard it spoken aloud, she understood the emotional verdict with perfect clarity. She could inhabit the Queen's residence, but she could never possess it. The king had withdrawn the original proposal and accepted the revised arrangement. The Queen Consort would receive full protection, staffing, and use of the property during the current reign, but ownership and future control would remain entirely with the Crown. What had once been presented as a permanent promise had been reduced to temporary permission. And that difference cut far deeper than any public statement could honestly acknowledge. The consequences began immediately. Officials suspended renovation plans involving permanent structural changes. Staffing appointments were reviewed. Documents that had described the residence as the Queen Consort's future private home were quietly recalled and rewritten. Every correction made the decision feel more final, because each change removed another trace of the certainty the king had once given her. The Queen Consort sat alone, the unused keys resting on the table before her. She didn't push them aside. She didn't call for an aid. When the king entered, she looked at him and asked only one question. "Did you ever actually have the power to promise this?" He couldn't answer immediately. The silence exposed everything. He finally admitted that he had promised certainty because he desperately wanted to erase years of rejection and insecurity. He had believed that giving her a permanent royal home would prove, beyond any doubt, that no one could ever push her aside again. She listened quietly. Then she told him that a promise made without the genuine power to keep it had offered comfort at first, and humiliation in the end. The heir soon learned how she had interpreted the outcome. Through a private palace briefing, he was told that the Queen Consort believed he had used constitutional procedure to publicly define her as temporary. That accusation genuinely unsettled him. He had protected the institution, but he now understood that a procedural victory could still leave a wound powerful enough to damage the entire family. The princess responded before that wound could harden into something permanent. In a private written message, she acknowledged the cruelty of belonging to a system where every home, every title, and every privilege could become a constant reminder that acceptance still carried legal limits. The Queen Consort read the message twice, but she sent no reply. Instead, she requested a private meeting with the heir. No king, no advisors, no prepared statements. The council had settled the property question, but behind a closed door, two people needed to decide whether the family could survive the meaning each had attached to it. The heir expected anger when he entered the private drawing room. Instead, he found the Queen Consort standing beside a cold, unlit fireplace. No aids, no folders, no prepared arguments between them. She didn't ask him to reverse the vote. She asked whether he had ever truly intended to let her feel secure within the monarchy. He explained that his resistance had never been about diminishing her dignity. Once a sovereign used crown property to settle a private obligation, he said, the next monarch inherited more than the financial cost. He inherited the precedent. The future king would be expected to defend a promise he had never personally made, funded through an institution never designed to serve one marriage indefinitely. She listened carefully. Then she revealed the fear she had hidden from almost everyone. The king's declining health and the heir's growing authority had made the future feel deeply uncertain. She didn't know where she would belong when the reign eventually ended, or whether her security would depend entirely on the goodwill of people who had never fully accepted her. The residents had represented protection from that possibility. The heir didn't dismiss the fear. He admitted that he had often treated her role as a political reality rather than a human one. He had focused on rules, consequences, and institutional inheritance while failing to fully consider what it meant to live beside a crown that could offer status one day and profound uncertainty the next. He couldn't give her ownership of an official residence, but he accepted that her future security should never depend on shifting family loyalties or uncertain goodwill. Then he offered a different path. He would support a privately funded lifetime residence for the Queen Consort, secured through personal royal resources rather than crown property. It would protect her independence completely without binding future sovereigns or removing an official home from institutional use. She finally admitted the truth she had been carrying. She had never needed that particular building as desperately as she needed proof that she would not be discarded when the reign ended. Once that fear was answered directly and honestly, she agreed to endorse the council's decision through a recorded palace statement. Her acceptance ended any remaining justification for further conflict. The heir returned to the king carrying a resolution, not a victory. When he delivered the queen consort's answer, the king finally understood something important. The obstacle had never been his son's cruelty or his son's ambition. It had been the hidden danger inside his own desperate, well-intentioned promise. By the following morning, the private dispute had escaped the palace walls entirely. Broadcasters interrupted their scheduled programming. Newspaper editors replaced their planned front pages. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, divided between those who believed the heir had publicly humiliated the queen consort and those who saw his intervention as the first genuine proof that the future king would place constitutional responsibility above personal family pressure. One unsigned document had become a national test of what the monarchy truly owns, what it merely manages, and whom it ultimately serves. Palace officials moved quickly. Their formal statement confirmed that the queen consort would retain full use of the residence while the king remained sovereign, but that the property itself would remain permanently attached to the crown. The wording emphasized continuity, accountability, and unanimous acceptance of the revised arrangement. Yet the carefully crafted statement did little to calm the public debate. It simply provided both sides with new, official language for the same deeply emotional battle. Commentators divided almost immediately. Some described the heir as a future king who had publicly challenged a reigning monarch. Others argued that he had acted responsibly, protecting the institution he would one day inherit from a decision that could never be easily undone. One side saw disobedience. The other saw preparation. Between those two judgments stood a family already bruised by what the public was only beginning to understand. The queen consort ended the public speculation herself. In a recorded statement, she confirmed that she accepted the council's decision and fully supported preserving the residence for future sovereigns. Her public endorsement stopped the dispute from escalating into an open war between royal factions, and it carried more weight than any palace press release ever could. The king responded by asking both his wife and his son to join him at the next official public engagement. The appearance wouldn't erase the wounds, but it would reveal whether they could stand together after power, fear, and loyalty had been stripped of every comfortable disguise. The final resolution arrived not with a dramatic resignation, a formal exile, or any public punishment. It came when the king entered a state reception with his wife beside him, and his son one careful step behind. For one brief moment, the king stopped, turned toward his son, and invited him forward. The gesture was small. Its meaning was not. The heir had challenged his father's decision, but he had not tried to take his father's place. He had protected the place itself. The Royal Estates Council formally recorded the residence as crown property, one that could be assigned for use, but never permanently transferred through an unreviewed personal promise. Any future change would require consultation and a documented vote, ensuring that no single reign could quietly bind the next. The queen consort's future was secured separately, through a private lifetime housing arrangement funded by personal royal resources. She would retain dignity, independence, and genuine protection without placing any permanent financial obligation on the sovereign's official estate. The compromise gave her real security, but it also forced the king to confront the full cost of his well-meaning mistake. He apologized before their next public appearance. He told his wife that he had confused possession with security, and admitted that his desperate desire to prove her acceptance had led him to promise something he held only temporarily, in trust. If this kind of deep, document-level royal storytelling is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter of this story is already developing behind closed palace doors.